doing that. And just by way of introduction, in addition to being Ilona's friend, I'm a partner at Phase 5, and I also Moonlight is the Chief Innovation Officer and the head of Experience Design Practice over here. And AI is a passion of mine. Professionally, we've been doing a fair bit of research, both from a user experience as well as product innovation angle, that has involved AI, and that led to the sort of thinking that brought us here. But before I dive into it, just want to give you a little bit of a roadmap of how I intend to speak today. Want to first set the stage, just provide a little bit of context, and then, since I'm anchoring this talk, and by the way, the talk itself arose out of a white paper. There's a 5-part white paper that's on LinkedIn that was published just last week. So if you're curious, you can go there. And of course, the title of it is Identity Drift, and the talk is grounded in this. So I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about what it is, and then, of course, why we in UX should care about this. What is the UX impact of it? And having cleared that, I would then propose the TAR framework based on trust, alignment, and recourse, which of course is the thesis, if you will. It is my hope that after this talk and anyone who reads the publication, and that we in the UX community, I know we are all thinking very seriously about AI, and what we at Phase 5 and I personally have attempted to do here is propose an early framework for AI UX. And that is what I'm arguing for today. A couple of other points that I want to make by way of context. First of all, I am a UX professional. I use AI, I study AI in our lab. We are building AI-based tools. But at the end of the day, I am not an AI engineer. I'm a UX professional. And at Phase 5, both within my practice area and as well as the others, but the key focus is really to study the human factor, whether at an individual level with its experience and attitudes, behavior, at a collective level, culture, and so on. But we do need to recognize, and we do all recognize, all various distractions of our time notwithstanding, that this truly is a Promethean moment for humankind. And when I use the word Promethean, I'm being extremely deliberate. It really is analogous to fire. The sapiens and Homo sapiens is at an inflection point, and about 100 years from now, our very sense of self, our sense of being, our sense of consciousness, sentience, not just how we work, but ontologically, we will have changed, and we will have embarked on a massive road of change. And a key reason, of course, why this is happening is not because AI is either artificial or because it's intelligent, but because it's not static. Its intelligence is self-generating, and it is adaptive. And so now it is in this moment that we've got some time to interrogate, and I say to the extent possible, because if one follows Geoffrey Hinton, of course, one might say the moment is very quickly passing, but to the extent possible, now is the time to try to define and command that broader context of our relationship with AI in terms of UX. That's who we are. It's the interaction between machines and humans. So where did this start? I love telling this story because this was January of this year. I was on my way to where my art studio is in Hudson. It was snowing outside, like a scene out of Dr. Zhivago. I was on a train, and I was having a very deep conversation with DeepSeek. I'll tell you what it was about. It was really about trying to reconcile the old debate about predestination and free will through probability equations. And it was a wonderful conversation. And then I had to take a break. We were nearing the station. I asked DeepSeek, this was on my phone, how do I download this transcript? And it gave me a strange answer where it didn't seem to be very sure if who I was talking to, and if it's DeepSeek or ChatGPT. And I thought maybe it was hedging a little bit. And then after a while, I ask, how do I upgrade to a paid version? And look at what it says here. It actually answers as though it is ChatGPT. And at that point, I actually ask it, why are you referring to yourself as ChatGPT? And on the left is a deep think. You can see a thought for 22 seconds about how exactly to answer this. And then there's its answer. But all it's thinking and its answers, notwithstanding, the fact is I was face to face shortly after DeepSeek was released. This was within days, I think, if not the next day. I encountered identity drift. It was right there. You had an AI that literally did not know who it was. And I could ask it, why are you referring to yourself as ChatGPT? And if you look at least there's not the machine readable bit, but the interpretation of its thinking that actually contemplates. And this is fundamentally different from hallucination or bad data. Hallucination, and we've all encountered this, we've read about it. You've got, probability and pattern recognition filling in the blanks in a way, because it is very smart at patterns, etc., that sounds like it would be the right thing, but in fact it doesn't exist, or is blatantly untrue or exaggerated, and so on and so forth. Or bad data, it might be drawing data from the incorrect source altogether, or exaggerating data, etc. But here, it is almost ontological. And it isn't some kind of, debate about, again, the sort of a higher order philosophical debate. This is real world consequences. For instance, you could have a situation, let's say, where an AI model is something that has been trained by multiple banks, or it has moved from one financial institution into a different context. And now this mortgage AI is filtering out self-employed applicants and contractors because it's now overlearned a pattern from traditional salaried applicants. Now, this is not necessarily something that it was taught, but it's something that it has learned, it's taught itself, and now it's beginning to disenfranchise an entire group, in this case, in this example, and this is a hypothetical example, of self-employed workers or contract workers. I'll give you a real example in a bit. What makes it even more galling, of course, is that applicants, as in a real-world example that I will share, are given no explanation. They're simply given denial. And so any kind of fairness from this institution is purely performative. And there is no role validation at all, because the system simply continues to do what it is doing by applying old thresholds in a world where the entire labor norms might have changed away from salaried employment to extremely gainful and profitable contract and self-employed work. Another example is an open banking misclassification. Of course, open banking is, well, in this country, both all around us and not all around us, but I mean, one way or the other, that is where we are headed. Imagine, if you will, a credit scorer AI that is trained on data from multiple financial institutions, and this can very well happen in this country, the way banking is set up, but it overweights one source's risk metrics, or let's say it overweights the risk metrics of 3 big banks against those that are neobanks. So what happens there is context collapse. And now, because it has overweighted the risk metrics of, let's say, a more conservative bank or a different bank altogether, it's denying credit to qualified applicants. And it loses the neutral role that it was, in this case, in open banking. It was meant to uphold. It was meant to have an aggregator role across institutions. But in fact, it's biasing the decision-making, if you will, the metrics of one of the contributors, and then teaching itself through generation and adaptiveness. And in doing so, in an open banking scenario, it's violating some fundamental promises of open banking, whether it's a fairness promise or the idea of financial portability. Once you take that away, you don't really, well, you still might have open banking, but you severely erode both the value and the promise. And of course, it makes the institutional opacity very, very high. What becomes interesting at this point, of course, for us to ask is, okay, this is happening. Why is this a UX issue? And How does this compare with any other ways in which we, as UX professionals, as HCI professionals, have looked at human-machine interaction? Well, what's interesting here in the world of AI is the disappearing interface. When you look at the entire history of the UX profession, starting with human-machine interaction, starting with wartime machines and a very different kind of interface, etc., it still was and still is to a large extent about the interface, whether it's input, whether it's output, and so on. But in a world of AI, it's the interface that is disappearing. And users are not engaging through interaction. The interaction was happening at an interface level. They're engaging through outcomes. And that is a critical difference. And it's something to bear in mind, because those outcomes become very alienating or arbitrary or unchallengeable when AI starts to drift. So the key points here to keep in mind, and this is what got me really thinking about this after the identity drift instance on the train, and then when I was at the studio, instead of making art, I actually started doing a fair bit of research into this and having conversations with AI on this very topic, is that we've shifted from UX's interaction to UX's outcome. And so far, because AI and the application of AI so far outpaces any kind of governance around it, or the ability to sit back, if you will, and take stock, the disappearance of visible feedback loops, because the interface, when we design interfaces, when we use interfaces, there are feedback loops. Some are bad, some are good, some are excellent, some are so good you don't even know they exist, and then they just pop up when you need them. But that's disappeared in the world of AI, or is very scarce. And when users can't understand those decisions, or worse still, when they can't challenge them, then confidence in the system collapses. And when those failures are experienced as betrayals, then you've got trust that collapses. And once you've got confidence and trust collapsing, that is pretty much what undergirds UX. I mean, even in an interface world, really, it's user confidence that ultimately becomes the key metric. That is what determines whether someone is going to explore an app, a site, a screen, an environment, a process, whatever that may be. So if confidence and trust collapse, then yes, we've got a UX problem. Now, before we talk about this framework, of course, and what we are proposing we should start thinking about in terms of doing something, it's important to maybe pause a little bit and just ponder why identity drift occurs. Again, just so we have this, and there's 4 key reasons. And we've touched upon these, so I won't spend too much time on it. In the first model, one of the examples that I shared, where you've got a bank that is somehow subject to a model that's trained on another bank's data. And this can very well happen, of course, in an M&A situation where one bank, a global bank, acquires a regional bank. And we know that happens in this country. We've probably, several of us in this room have done research to support that project. But a fraud model trained on one particular bank applied to another suddenly starts flagging legitimate activity. And this is because AI systems do often ingest data from multiple sources. I mean, that's just how it is, where there's multiple banks, multiple markets, multiple sectors. And it does boost general performance. That's the whole point of it, of course. But depending on governance models, it might erode contextual clarity. And what's important to note here is that the failure is not that the AI has stopped functioning, it's that it starts functioning as something else, as someone else. And this is an epistemic blur, which is not a bug at all. It is simply the ungoverned side of what would happen when you're scaling up, but not necessarily looking to govern identity drift. The second is where it drifts away through continuous optimization without memory of its original intended purpose. So a trading algorithm let's say, is designed to optimize risk-adjusted returns. So optimize is the key word here, and the return should be adjusted within defined exposure limits. But over time, this particular algo starts chasing short-term profits because it's realized it's incentivized by short-term rewards, performance metrics like daily gains, hit rate. And as a result, it starts drifting away from its original intended purpose, which was the risk discipline, to optimize within the risk discipline. And because this hasn't been noticed necessarily, but the next point talks to precisely that, no human being necessarily intervenes to correct the shift, and the system simply adapts to what it thinks success means. And because no one has stepped in to correct it, it actually takes it as affirmation and continues to adapt and continues to optimize without regard for the original risk boundaries. So over time, the system or systems will reorient away from their institutional intent. And when optimization outpaces oversight, that's when drift becomes invisible. And that is, of course, like until the damage is done and one is already in crisis mode. And what is interesting in all of this is that identity drift happens very silently. I mean, it could happen suddenly. It's not that it couldn't. On the train, I mean, clearly there was a sudden moment where, I mean, that was a very simple case, if you will, where one could clearly see the AI didn't know who it was. But in a larger system, there might not be alarms or logs. The recommender engine might simply start surfacing skewed results and then feel off, but it might not necessarily feel broken. And like so many things that are incrementally off, normalized incrementally off, until all of a sudden there is that tipping point. And by the time anyone notices, it's already rewritten its own operating systems. And this is something, by the way, in the last 3 slides, I'm sure you've noticed, and I should have mentioned early on, Ilona did ask me to mention this, we will be sharing the slide deck with anyone who registered, etc. And the white paper is available on the Phase 5 website. But what I tried to do in putting this together was provide links that you can follow up or further studies, because these have all individually been very well researched and studied. What I haven't seen, frankly, is a sort of a movement towards a UX governance framework. So the continuous optimization without memory of purpose, it happens silently. And what is quite insidious about AI in some ways are both governance gaps and a black box problem, is that a lot of AI systems operate as opaque black boxes. And when something goes wrong, even internal teams often can't trace why a decision was made. And I'll just pause on this little real-world example here from Anthropic's Claude AI. And it had these hidden features, the patterns that it uses to make these decisions. And they sort of took over at one point. And there were hidden features, and engineers at Anthropic at that point in time were very limited in terms of what they could do by way of either fully identifying all the hidden features or necessarily doing anything about them. And you can, of course, read about that particular article when you receive the deck. So the opacity not only hinders things like audits and reversals, but what also happens is it also hinders accountability. So the attribution of responsibility in this case simply becomes that much more diffuse, whether it's the model builder, whether there's a regulator, whether there's a third-party provider, whether it's a deployer, the vendor, and so on and so forth. So again, in that sort of loan approval model, if you will, it could begin rejecting various applications because of correlations that it's learned internally. And by the time auditors actually intervene, it's already embedded opaque rules. And the reason why I spent some time talking about that is because AI drift is in fact, to a large extent, when it happens, a product of a governance crisis. And this is where oversight and a UX framework becomes very important. Because we know AI systems are now making high stakes decisions, not just in finance and healthcare, but also in government. We all know about south of the border with the cuts and AI replacement. The fact is, it's coming everywhere. And it's coming without interface, it's coming without transparency. And I don't want to necessarily say it's coming without accountability from government, but if you talk about latent accountability, implicit accountability built into interfaces or human-oriented interactions or human-mediated interactions, then yes, relatively very scarce and scant accountability. Second, and this is where regulatory frameworks fail, is that regulatory frameworks are built around an assumption of stability. Regulatory frameworks dealing with software think about stable code bases. They think about updates. They think about, again, stable states. But adaptive AI doesn't just move silently, but it recalibrates itself at a pace, in a sense, one could say colloquially, of its own. And the question becomes, who's responsible? And users are left without answers. Users are left without recourse. Through all of this, the drift becomes dangerous as no one notices. And the result, of course, is a trust collapse. And I promised you a real-world example that sums it all up. And this happened less than 2 years ago in the United Kingdom. A country that holds one of the international centers of AI, highly advanced. And October 2023, and it was the Department of Work and Pensions. And the idea of using AI, the project, what it was used for was actually, it was fraud prevention, detect potential benefits fraud. And in this case, there was real life catastrophic consequences to groups of individuals who were mistakenly flagged. And to add insult to injury, they happened to belong, in disproportionately so, to one particular community. And then when you think about it in the context of Brexit and the politics of it and the passions of it more than the politics of it and so on, the consequences just multiply beyond being left without financial support for extended periods. And of course, when asked, they defended the system, they declined to share details, etc. But what it came down to was the opacity of the system, the lack of fairness, the lack of any kind of recourse, and of course, a collapse in trust. And the Guardian covered it, as the Guardian does on these things very well. So where does governance stand today? Is nothing happening? No, lots of things are happening, as you can see on the left. And I don't necessarily want to go through all of this. But not only are these frameworks fragmented, or in some cases quite complex, or deemed onerous, what is interesting from our point of view today is that while these frameworks are evolving, and they're also happening at an international level with the Seoul Declaration and so on, but none is really designed to track and correct real-time drift from a user's point of view. And this is where we argue very strongly that to design frameworks, to design systems that evolve responsibly, we do need a framework. We need a UX framework that is built for adaptive AI and human trust. And that is where this framework based on trust, alignment, and recourse comes in. So why talk? I mentioned some of these points before. One, because the existing oversight assumes that systems are static and AI is simply not static. Two, because the decisions become outcomes. And when they become outcomes, that's when the governance is not just about inputs, it's not about outputs, it's not about quanta. It is about experience. It becomes experience aware. And governance, traditionally, it talks about rights. Sometimes it talks about responsibilities, but it does not necessarily reveal itself to be experience aware. And TAR, this particular framework, is designed to prevent drift from becoming harm. T, which is for trust, is built around the assumption that explainability is the new usability, if you will, of a system in the absence of an interface. Alignment, making sure that systems stay aligned within the original intended role and institutional intent. And recourse, that users must be able to challenge the AI outcomes. So what is trust? I mean, simply if we were to ask ourselves for a definition of trust and in the context of any system, it's a user's belief that that system is operating, first of all, fairly, and then transparently, and of course, in alignment with expectations, in that order. And it's also, and this is a very important part of trust, and when we do trust, we do studies and brand studies and trust as an attribute and so on. One of the key things one learns, and of course one learns from experience, is that trust is earned through consistent, explainable, and grounded experiences. Trust is not a promise made. It is an experience that has been habituated. And why it matters is because in the world of AI is because these high impact decisions are often made without any kind of visible logic. Even if it is not strictly a black box system in that the box might be open to engineers, etc., but it's certainly not to users, and certainly not situationally. So with AI, it's always a situational black box. So if users don't understand why something happened, that's when trust erodes, even if the outcome is correct at times. And of course, in traditional UX, there were all kinds of interaction and feedback loops, as I mentioned. But this is where, in the world of AI, with the disappearance of the interface, it's built through explanation, through perceived legitimacy of the outcomes. And this is the first fracture, trust, when AI fails. And often it's not because the decision is wrong, but because it was inexplicable. Alignment, which is keeping AI grounded in its purpose. It is by definition the condition in which an AI system continues to operate within the scope of its intended role, the original one. And that role, of course, is defined by purpose, by policy, by ethical commitments. But in this case, as we've been discussing, it adapts over time. And without that kind of grounding are the unintended goals. And the link to UX, of course, is that users expect consistent logic. Because users are not necessarily aware of, and especially in the black box scenario, of any kind of drift. So when it does drift away from or contradict its implied role, users do lose faith in the system's integrity, even if whatever the interface proxy or something, some other aspect of the experience might remain very, very polished. And finally, recourse. It's restoring agency when AI gets it wrong. It's the ability to challenge, to escalate, and where justified, overturn an AI-driven decision, especially when it has material consequences. Because what you don't want are users who feel trapped. A user who feels trapped in a system is not going to, that experience is not going to lead to any kind of long-term or even short-term system success. And a system that simply cannot be questioned is not just unaccountable. Over time, it is actually unsafe. So good UX for AI would always give users a way to recover from error. And that means designing parts to dispute, to question, to challenge, to appeal, to override, to understand, and not just as afterthoughts, but as a fundamental part of the architecture. Because from a user's perspective, this is not a glitch. It is a system that behaves with authority, but without responsibility. And authority without responsibility, the idea of systemic disenfranchisement in this case is catastrophic for UX. So in terms of heuristics, and to be brutally honest, I derived inspiration here from Nielsen and Norman, who at the start of, what we might today call traditional UX, gifted us what was the iteration then, it's evolved over time, a list of just key pillars with attendant very high level heuristics. And while a lot of that today might seem common sense, A, at the dawn of UX, they weren't, and B, they have always provided us in the community with a framework and ammunition, if you will, to ask for things to make sure that these conditions have been met. I'm not going to read every single one of these here. You can, of course, and you'll get it. But for trust, it ranges from decision rationale and consistency through to auditability and stakeholder review. Likewise, for alignment, the heuristics for role fidelity. These aren't that many, but task integrity, which is a pretty fundamental question to ask. Is the AI still performing the function that it was originally designed for? And role anchoring. So anchor examples are a predefined set of inputs that you've got from which you would get particular outputs, and you'd use that as a frame of reference to compare your AI performance to. Are they being used to test the stability of decision logic? Are tools in place to take drift monitoring? Are there guardrails for optimization? And of course, just monitoring AI's behavior against the institution's policies and values. And heuristics for challengeability. Escalation pathways. Is there a clear and timely way to escalate or contest a particular decision? User awareness. This is so fundamentally important. Are users informed of their right to appeal or request human review? Or is it simply occult, UX? Resolution timelines, because we know that one of the key soothers of anxiety is transparency, and that's precisely why we get all the progress bars and so on and so forth. So the resolution timelines, and of course, system logging and empowered oversight. Are human reviewers actually trained and authorized to reverse AI decisions? Now, I fully recognize that it's one thing to have heuristics, but it's really quite difficult to operationalize them at scale. If it were easy, I suppose everyone would be doing all of these things, or not, because ease is not the only reason why people don't do a lot of things one ought to be. But the key implementation challenges fully recognize them are legacy systems, for instance. Most AI governance pipelines, the ones that exist today, they were not designed with any kind of real-time oversight in mind. This again goes back to that idea of an assumption around or building a framework around a stable or a static system versus recognizing that something is fundamentally not only not static, but becoming not just continuously evolving, but even more intelligent. We didn't even, touch upon, or I've mentioned by name, the AGI, not AI. And once that takes off, just imagine what would happen to all of this. Lack of ownership, that's a challenge to implementing heuristics. We see that even in the world of UX today, or in the world of CX. There are, and this is no one's fault. There's a reason why organizations are governed the way they are, but compliance might not be able to agree with IT, and then there's the human factors team, and so on and so forth, and insights and BU, but that persists, and that will only make this complex problem even more complex. Explainability fatigue, though, might be one of the greatest barriers, because companies don't want to have to explain for any number of reasons. And it simply adds friction in the name of transparency. And then so they would say, look, I don't want to do this. And under market pressure, you either want my BU to be transparent, or you want me to write, the explainability thing. And by the way, each of these things that I'm saying now, we heard about 20 years ago. And a lot of this in the world of UX, though, today, are actually embedded in institutions as good practice. So to give credit where credit is due, The fight is always uphill at the start of the adoption of a particular technology. And then there's escalation resistance. There's a reason why self-serve is on the rise and why that is a strategic priority for everybody. And the last thing one wants is necessarily any kind of mechanism that gets them further involved or invite regulatory scrutiny. Having said that, there is a way forward, just as there was with UX. Number one, and we've seen this in the world of UX, we've seen this in the banks and our clients at Phase 5, and we're so proud of them. I mean, Canadian banks are in UX over time, and some more so than others, but have shown amazing sort of stewardship in terms of the world of UX, and similarly assign AI product stewardship. We know that our clients already think in terms of AI-driven CX, but stewardship is often in large organizations where the cookie crumbles. It goes back to accountability. Anchor examples. It's often easy to just press a launch button and keep going without saying, we need to have these anchor examples against which we will benchmark, we will test performance so that we can see if AI is beginning to behave unpredictably. Involving UX early, bringing in the researchers, bringing in the service designers into the AI life cycles. At the time of model scoping, at the time of testing, treating it like anything else that we have done the last 20 years, building internal redress flows, and sometimes even a basic submit for review button is of psychological relief to the user. It's so much better than just a black box decision. And of course, use whatever is already auditable, whether it's model lineage, whether it's version control, any logs from output if they're there, have a governance framework and use those. And there are companies that are already doing, there are very conscientious companies, large and small, as large as IBM and Microsoft, and a neobank like Monzo in the UK. And they've already taken initiatives, and these are, again, very transparent. These are hyperlinks. When you click on them, you'll be able to see exactly what they're saying about this, about what they're doing. It's not exactly, they don't necessarily pertain to the heuristics, they pertain to the principles. And I really do think the heuristics are important, but nonetheless, there's tremendous room for optimism here. IBM has a model risk management system. It includes drift detection. It has audit trails. It adds human checkpoints. So it's got alignment. It's got recourse. And they have this whole white paper. One can read about this. Microsoft has the responsible AI standard. You can download that in PDF. So trust, recourse, and their big thing is documentation. It's redress mechanisms. Monzo, which is at the other end of the spectrum from these big hitters, international big hitters, neobank in the UK, they've got, there was a whole thing there around debanking, etc., frozen accounts, and so it provides some post hoc human review for fraud-related account blocks, etc. Users can appeal, request explanation. And Salesforce has its model cards, so in which the AI tools, they describe the purpose, the limitation, the deployment constraints. So again, that's very much an alignment. And of course, that builds trust in a big way. So I will close with this. I hope in this talk, I might not have told you anything earth-shatteringly new. What I wanted to do was group existing thoughts floating around in various very important contexts, but around the central idea of identity drift in AI, fundamentally as a UX problem, in recognition of the fact that AI is very different from human-machine interaction-driven UX, from interface-driven UX, and that lack of governance at this Promethean moment, if you will, is a huge risk to identity drift and towards this kind of catastrophic experience that we all hope to avoid. So thank you. I'll pause here and take questions. And Ilona, if you wouldn't mind moderating, because I'm not sure I can actually see everybody and I wouldn't be able to see raised hands and stuff. So, or anyone with a question, just speak up. It's a closed family, as it were, so no need to stand in ceremony.
Happy to watch hand raises and or unmute. Please feel free. The microphones are open.
That, by the way, is a very human.
That's a lot of food for thought. That was frightening and necessary. I love that last quote. The annoying glitch is actually a UX challenge. Thank you.
Yes. And by the way, please don't consider me narcissistic here. Put it in quotes. I probably shouldn't have it, the quoting from the white paper. So I'm quoting myself here, if you will. But I mean, which is anyway, it's from the paper. And,
Dan.
Arnie, how are you?
I'm good, Dan. How are you?
Good, thanks. Thank you so much for this. This is an amazing presentation. For me, selfishly, because number one, I've actually just begun looking into the UX role in training of models, the model life cycle myself. So this is perfect timing. And also because I'm about to be brought into a project that has AI as its core value driver, and I think I am going to need to start addressing some of these issues around the around trust, around things related to AI. One question, I guess, and I'm not sure how to ask this to make it more interesting, but some of the examples, and I fully agree with the issue overall. Some of the examples that you gave related to an AI being trained and then providing an outcome for individuals perhaps once and drifting over, its interactions with many people, and then by the time it hits you, the result is not really an optimal result for you. I'm curious your thoughts on a situation where you have an AI that is interacting with you individually and knows who you are, plus a lot of other people, but with each user is interacting over and over again every day, and you're providing feedback to the model about you. And so it can learn about you, I guess, specifically. So I'm curious in that situation, what your view would be on the potential risk of model drift there.
Well, it depends, of course, on what that AI model is being used for. If it's, let's say, Stable Diffusion, and I'm training it with my artwork, or if it's ChatGPT, and I'm actually, ChatGPT learns in different ways, both from the thumbs up and so on. If anything, I'm making it very efficient. And what upsets me in those examples is where I very quickly realize every now and then that it keeps defaulting to certain preferences that directly contradict what I've actually thought I trained it to do. But in theory, because here I am, a techno-optimist, all these glitches will go away. They'll go away in no time, and whatever, that stuff will happen. This is where I see a more insidious danger. Imagine I'm interacting with my bank, any of the banks who've been our clients and partners and employers and so on here. And my interaction has now turned to an AI chat based thing, very much like Lemonade Insurance. They actually advertise that in their TV. And so the tone of the conversation, let's say, has become quite personal. If anything, at one point in time, this is now good. It's created brand stickiness and deep relationship. And I'm very pleased with all of this. Now, imagine a situation where the institution needs to have a difficult conversation with me because I haven't paid a loan, or I don't know, some wire spin trip somewhere. I have now, there's a fundamental commercial problem. What does betrayal feel like? this becomes a different experience. And I will tell you personally, this is so innocuous compared to what I described to you. I use so much AI all the time, like the conversation with AI, just if I'm on a train, now instead of reading a book, I'll have a sparring match or whatever it is. And then one time I had an issue with chat. I thought I'd lost the chat and so on. And so I started saying, you know, where is it? And I started getting this sort of very institutional response. And the way chat talks to me, it actually says, Arnie, it'll crack a little joke here and there. It knows I speak Bangla. So like there's all sorts of things it does. It was a serious rupture in experience and relationship. And I know that's not exactly perhaps your question, but it does go back to the UX of it, where you've got this AI, it's been trained very well, it's your buddy now, and boom, there's a rupture.
Yeah. Maybe I'll give you a more specific example. So you're interacting with an AI that is giving you recommendations and actions that you take every day. And it's the same basic kind of action that you can take. And so just thinking about it as you were talking, I'm wondering, like, let's say you can say that you took the action or not. So the model is learning from you based on your responses to certain actions. So I mean, it as it learns, it could obviously give you fewer recommendations of one kind and more of another, perhaps. But it could also learn that maybe you're just not interested in playing the game. Hopefully give you fewer recommendations and not give you recommendations that it could be giving you that are opportunities.
Correct. And both of those scenarios are equal, I would say, logically equally true. And there could also be training burden on the user. How many times do you actually take the time to press like after you've really liked a Netflix film? The other day I found myself just on a roll. I went through a whole bunch because I realized I don't actually do it. But if I did it, in theory, its recommendation would get better. Now, if I truly like a diversity of movies, I would presumably give it a diversity of likes. But if the only time I remember to give it likes was during the crime thrillers, then I'm mistraining it. And now I'm killing off all the other choice possibilities that I would get.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, fantastic. Thanks. I'm sorry, I don't want to monopolize the question.
No, not at all, Dan.
Thank you so much for that
question.
Right.
Well, if there are no more questions, as I said, we will be, contact Ilona, I'm sure Torkai or Harumi, they know how these things are done. And we'll share this with you, I think, in a format PDF or whatever, so you can actually click on the links and do further reading.
We're going to give people another minute. Do you have a favorite AI that you are currently?
I do, and it's boring, it's chat, even though Claude sometimes writes a little bit more beautifully about things, but in terms of pushback, both willingness and ability to push back, argue, spar, I find chat's incredible. DeepSeek is the absolute worst on that front. Gemini is good, but yes, my favorite is chat amongst LLMs. But what's very interesting about chat is, so I'm also a visual artist, and some of this is my art. This is a photograph of the Transact Club of Jamsack that happens every Sunday, and it's about as human as it gets, like in the annex. And yeah, it's I keep coming back to chat. So
have you tried Notebook LM?
Not extensively.
The podcast feature is really interesting there.
And we're actually building a box now that would give the user the ability to choose between favorite AI models based on what it is one's doing, computational versus language, and so on and so forth. But what I was going to say about chat, what I find very interesting as an artist and photographer is chat. So there's two kinds of AI in the way they see pictures, right? Like chat takes everything, and I don't want to say reduces, it translates into words. So if you fed it this picture and you asked it to regenerate it, it wouldn't regenerate this picture. It couldn't, because it would re-describe the picture and retranslate it. And then you've got AI that would look at this in terms of sort of pixels and color and hue and distance and so on and so forth. And one of the things I've been pondering now, and I'm chatting with AI models about, is, you know, the idea of experience in terms of feeling, or what we call sentient feeling, lies in joining those two. And it's, anyway, complete non sequitur, but I just thought I would talk about something related to AI. And I love this picture. It's one of my favorites. And Alex is a great photographer.
Yeah, I'm totally out of the loop.
But Alex, your art, you use, well, it uses AI, but tactical AI, I suppose, for certain things. But you work digitally in your art, don't you?
Yes, but it's very simplistic. It just does the math in dividing things.
For the points and the organized, right.
Yeah.
Alex's art is really fantastic. It's well, they're all stars, if you will, but they're meaningful. There's the geometry to them, and Alex will take a photograph, and then we both deal with pieces of our pictures, but Alex does different things from what I do. And
yeah, it's like foraging for mushrooms instead of going to the supermarket to buy it.
right, I like that. And that's a photograph that the artist Joel Richardson and I are working on. It's his idea, The Lonely Astronaut. So I thought that was appropriate in a world of sort of free falling. I always have the Tom Petty song in my head when I see this picture. But anyway. Well, shall we?
You have left people speechless, Arnie, so rare for this.
Oh, but then let me end with this. ChatGPT, however, drew this picture based on our conversation. I asked it to render a picture on identity drift. So based on all the things that we do, Chad and I have a thing, and I said, look, because you know, it's like artist credo, you always stay away from AI-generated art if you want to maintain any credibility as an artist in the market. But I said, you know, show me what you would do. That's what it did. Ain't bad, eh?
It's 20 hours.
So
May I ask, what tool did you use for this picture generation?
So I use Chat, but Chat uses DALL-E.
Dolly, okay.
DALL-E, DL, like, and DALL-E is a tool, of course, that uses language to picture rather than holding up, like being able to see a picture as a picture, like Midjourney would, right? Or like it doesn't see a picture as a, so it, anyway, sorry. I'm
Great, yeah, no, it's great. I really enjoy your presentation. So just want to say I'm taking a course on design thinking through IDEO, and I've been trying to kind of get images. So I've been trying different tools, but ChatGPT is very slow and it really doesn't really give you images based on text.
No, the best way to use ChatGPT is to get it into a full-on Socratic dialogue about something and push a point to its limit up and down and sideways like pizza dough, and then you ask it to spin it into what do you want it to do. And then it has everything to work with, including your thinking process. By the way, I will end by saying that as you probably gathered from my tone, I'm a bit of an evangelist in this, and I know Ilona can relate. So if there are speaking opportunities on this topic, by Zoom, in person, whatever it may be, this is something that I'm speaking at clients' places. I want to keep talking about it and expanding this conversation. Thank you.